A real privilege this afternoon. Pastor Carey and I have been able to get a little bit of time with the author of our Advent study, The Angels of Christmas, the Reverend Susan Robb. So we are really happy to welcome you here in this way, Susan, for these moments together. We're just going to take a simple format. We've been asking you guys for some questions over recent weeks, and we've compiled some of those questions, added a couple of our own, and Pastor Carey is going to lead our conversation through over the next few minutes. So let me hand over to her.
Yeah, thank you. We're really excited about getting to talk to you today. We really have enjoyed your book, both in the online class and then in the in-person classes. And so people are anxious to hear. Will you just, before we get going, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to write this book?
Okay, well, and before I do that, I want to say thank you for letting me do this. And I'm so sorry that I didn't have time while you were doing the study for me to join you all, because I enjoyed so much being with you last time. And I loved, just last week, I happened to stumble across one of your Facebook posts of one of the sessions, and I listened to the whole thing, much like probably hours after you filmed it. And it was wonderful. I loved hearing your conversation. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So a little bit about me. I grew up, I'm a Texan. I grew up in a really small rural town in Texas, a population 350 people, but it was outside of Waco, Texas. And so I grew up there, went to school. In my early years after college, I was a high school teacher, and then met my husband. We got married, stayed home with kiddos, and went to seminary a little later in life when my kids were in school. And so out of that, just became really involved, obviously, in the life of the church, as we all are as ministers, and have taught a women's Bible study on Thursdays for probably the last 15 years. And so when you talk about how the book came to be, I always say, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but I feel like I'm an accidental author because I teach a lot of Bible studies. Sometimes I can't find curriculum I like, and I would just write my own. And I did this several years ago, not several, probably 4 or 5 years ago. And out of that study that we did called Hearing and Responding to God's Voice, people like the study, and a lot of people like the study. And I thought, well, I wonder if it has a good editor, if it would be publishable. So I contacted Abingdon Press, and someone I know gave me the name of an editor there. They liked it. And then that has sort of started this, me writing Bible studies with and for Abingdon. So they called me and asked me if I would be interested in writing a study for Lent. And I said, I would love to. And they said, we know what we want it to be about. Let's make it about the last 7 words of Christ. And I thought, that's wonderful, except hasn't everyone already written a book about 7 words? And they said, yes, but we haven't had one published in a long time, and we would love for you to offer a new interpretation of that. And we think it'd be great. So we did that. And then they came back and said, how about we do an Advent study? And I thought, that is just right up my alley. I would love it. And my editor and I just did a lot of brainstorming on what's been done and what hasn't been done. And I said, what if we did this from the, not through the lens of the angels, but through the lens of the messages of the angels? That seemed like that would be very interesting. And I really love the idea of delving deeper into the stories of not just the angels in the nativity stories, but also finding out more about angels in the Old Testament. Is there any connection? And of course, there's a lot of connection. So that is how the book came to be. Then I taught the material for this again to my women's Bible study that I teach on Thursdays. I did that last Advent. And from that, expanded the stories, and that's kind of how the book came about.
I desire to know. I always wonder, when you write a book, like kind of what gets edited out that you wish was in the book, or after you hit done, close it, published. What are you like? I wish I had added that. I just want to know if there's anything.
There's a lot. It happens all the time that right after you finish, you go, oh my gosh. You find that note about something that you knew just had to be in there and it was left out. And there were a couple of things, and sometimes you think there's just not room to put everything you want to say. And I really wish there's one thing that I think I wish there had been room for, more room for, and another that I thought it was in and it was really out. And I'll tell you about that. So the thing I wished I'd had more time to expand upon was the women in the genealogy in Matthew's gospel, because I love each one of their stories. And I thought, you could probably just write a whole book on that. But I love talking about them. But just if we wanted to keep things focused on the message of the angels. So I just sort of skimmed over who they were, but I really wish I had taken time to open those stories up a little bit more. So that was me. I just thought, well, we need to keep things focused. Then you did notice at the end, and let me show you what I have here. At the end of each chapter, there's the angels gather among us story. And I told the story in the epilogue of this pillow that a friend gave me when my dad died. And here it is, angels gather among us. And so that's where that came from. But I wrote several angels gather among us stories, and I sort of sent all of them separately. And I told the editor, I said, why don't you match the stories with the chapters where you think they fit the best? And I had an idea of what I thought. And I submitted several, and what I assumed would make it in and didn't. And I didn't even check until I got my first copy in the mail. There's a story of when our church, the church is my home church and where I ended up being on staff for so long, is really missionally oriented. And in the 1970s, we started a mission in Haiti. It was an eye clinic. So there's a man in our congregation who is an eye doctor, and we wanted to do a mission at that time for what was the poorest country in the world. And we started an eye clinic in Haiti, and he would take mission teams down with other doctors and nurses. And we treated hundreds of thousands of people over the years, literally restoring sight to the blind. And I think it was in 2001. I think in 2001, there was a mission trip to Haiti. And while they were there was the big earthquake. And the eye clinic, we had a team there, and the eye clinic collapsed and fell in on some of our team. Some of the team was outside and some were in the clinic, and the building collapsed on them. And some of them were being crushed by the debris. And we were being contacted about how can we air flight the people out? How can we get to them? And just out of nowhere, the roads were hard. They were, the earthquake had just covered all the roads. They were impassable. And some man just happened to be coming by in a truck, and he stopped to see does anybody here in this area need a hydraulic jack? And of course they said, yes, we've got a beam on these folks underground here, and can you help us? And he lifted it up, and they were able to get them out and get them to the airport. Wow. And we flew a plane in to pick them up and carry them to Miami to the hospital. So anyway, one of the people died in Miami once they got there, but we rescued a ton of people from the debris, and everyone just were shocked because this man appeared with a hydraulic jack. Where does that come from? And then he disappeared, and no one could find him afterward. And he was this angel that came at just the right time. So that was one story I assumed was in the book, and realized and wish that I'd said, hey, what about this one? Or I wish if I'd realized it had made it in, I would have figured out a place to put it.
Wow.
So those were two things. Yeah.
Wow. Hey, I want to big up the study that was written by Pastor Alice, who couldn't join us today. She actually did a study on some of those women of the Old Testament and the stories behind them, and we actually preached our way through some of those characters this last year. So we should connect you up in terms of that extra work that you didn't get to put into the book, and some of the stuff that Alice had done on that, because she's done a really good study on it.
Yeah. I've heard it was a really good study. Yeah.
So I would love to know from you all, because you've been with your folks for all this time. I would assume that you heard some really good angels among us stories too from your congregation.
I heard one today. I'm
Mhm.
telling you, this woman tells me this story about how she's okay, I'm going to try to get it right because she's going to watch this video for sure. So I'm really going to try to do this right, but I'm not going to use names because I didn't get permission. So she's in Mayo Clinic, and she has got, which is one of the area hospitals. Is that a national hospital? It doesn't matter. She's in the hospital, and she has gotten, oh, I'm going to try this hard. She's gotten some bad news, or she's having difficult news. And this doctor or nurse is in there working with it, walks in and is like, the Lord is here.
Mhm.
Never met this patient before. And she goes about her work, goes about her work. And then the doctor comes in and is doing some work, explaining why things didn't go well, leaves, and then comes back and is like, can I pray with you? And
Wow.
pray. So this is not like a Christian hospital. Like we've got those around here too.
Yeah.
Then what had happened was it was a cardiac doctor, and her heart needed AFib. Something was out of rhythm or something. I don't do doctor things. And then in the middle of the night, she gets woken up by a nurse, tap, tap, tap on the shoulder. And he says, I'm sorry to wake you up, but I just want to let you know that your heart is back in rhythm. And his name was Gabriel. She tells this story today at my Lunch and Learn class, and we were like, are you kidding me? So that was what I heard today.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
We've actually picked up a couple of stories in our staff meeting. I don't know if you've noticed this, Carrie, but the last couple of weeks, and Sarah's story when her husband was in like 7 hours of surgery, and she was basically at the hospital waiting room more or less on her own during that time, and 2 individuals came up to her from nowhere, just sat with her, then sort of later on came back, checked in on her, and
texted her later. Like these people who just appeared to care for her. There have been several stories, and I think that it's helped us really notice. These people have always been there, but now we get to notice it and name it and see the correlation of the scriptures. And it's really neat. Okay, I want to ask, so this has been a very big question about Jesus's lineage. And we had read about where, of course, there's women in this and there's not in a lot of the Old Testament one. But one of the things that one of our members in particular, and now apparently my whole Thursday class keeps coming back to is, all right, if Jewish identity, I don't know what the right word for it is, passed down through the mother. But Joseph is the line of David. How does that actually work? And we've kind of talked about it, but they really wanted to hear from you and what your thoughts were.
Well, I wish I'd done more homework on that, because I got that question today when I taught this class to someone else. And all I can think of is this: if we go back into that lineage, think of how many women were in there. The 4 women that were listed are Gentiles.
Right.
And obviously all of the children that they bear are Jewish. So obviously we think of Ruth saying, Naomi says, go back to your family. And this is she's a Moabite. And she's like, no, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people and your God will be my God. I would assume that they are converts, and that somehow because of that, they are now part of the Jewish faith. So that's the best I can offer right now without having read anything about it until I opened up my computer today.
Yeah, so you're in the same boat we are.
Same boat, but let's all go do a little research on that, because I got that question today, and obviously I've wondered the same thing, but I haven't done enough research on it. But there are plenty of women who were Gentiles who give birth to these incredible men.
Right. And I kind of also likened it to the language that Paul uses later about how the Gentiles are grafted in or adopted into the family of God. And so, nobody's uncomfortable with the way that it is. They're just curious. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So,
who we need to get on this, Carrie, is our other friend, Amy Jill Levine. I bet you could give us an answer to that.
We did interview her, and she probably could give us an interview. That's a good idea.
I love Amy Jill. Love Amy Jill. And I almost put a story in here. So the lady who's my editor is also Amy Jill's editor. And when I was in seminary, I read a ton of Amy Jill Levine's books and commentaries. And have y'all ever heard the story about her? Did she tell that when you've talked to her about when she was a little girl growing up in, and I'm going to get this wrong, around New York somewhere. I'm saying Brooklyn, I could be wrong. And she grew up, I think, perhaps going to a Catholic school, but anyway, the whole neighborhood was Christian. And she said, so she's like the only Jewish kid she knows for a lot around. And she said she would get nervous every Christmas, kind of afraid that, she would like wake up one night and she would hear, "Greetings, Amy Jill," favored one. And she was always afraid that she was going to be the one that God came to,
I think she did tell us that story, because it was an Advent study that she joined us for.
I don't remember that. Yeah.
Has she told you this story?
I don't think so.
I think she might have. I can't, like, parts of it are familiar as you say them. So
yeah. Well, I would love to have a conversation with her too. And, she's done a wonderful, maybe she's an editor, but there's a Jewish annotated, a New Testament that's annotated through kind of a Jewish lens. And I have that, and she's a contributor to that. And I use it quite a bit. So I bet if we go back to that, if I look at the Matthew section and that with her comments, I bet she'll tell us.
We all have homework now. Sue McCann will be so proud of herself.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question came up today in my Thursday class. Why do you suppose it's very inconceivable for my class to understand why some of the Jews, why all Jews don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah? And so I think that we have a 2020 hindsight 2020. We see what happened, and so I just thought you could. They wanted me to ask you what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah. I think maybe for the same reason that many didn't, even in the moment when all of this happened and the resurrection happened, and people were saying, "Look, this proves this is so." But maybe there were still a lot of people who were saying, "No, this is not the kind of Messiah we're looking for. This isn't what we had in mind." Or I think often too, if we look at the Gospels, how they're written anywhere, let's say from 30, 40, 50 years later, after Jesus, they've had time to think about and contemplate what Jesus's resurrection meant, and to say, see, this was to fulfill what the prophet Isaiah said way back when, where even in the day of Isaiah, when Isaiah said, those who live in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. My guess is that God was doing something great in that day that's bringing light to the people of Isaiah's day. But we could look back as Christians and say, but yes, this prophecy is true now too. Yeah. So I think that it's just, they're like, that's not what I had in mind. It's such a far-fetched story. Does that really? I mean, just for the same reason people didn't believe 2,000 years ago.
Right. And then there's all this time to build. Sorry, Charlie.
No, I was going to say, because this was part of our conversation last night in chapter 3, right? Was the whole idea that God's doing a new thing, and the struggle with the new thing that God is doing, and like Jesus is literally the new thing that God is doing in that moment. So it makes sense, and it tracks that there are people who continue to struggle with it. I mean, we talked a little bit about the ordination of women last night as part of one of those sort of specific topics. And what is it, 65, 70 years ago for United Methodism, or for the Methodist Church here in the United States. And there are still churches that struggle with the new thing that God was doing 65, 70 years ago.
And God did that a long time ago.
Right?
So quite honest, yeah, you're right. And not only that, I think Paul did that a long time ago.
Yes.
Paul had put women in charge of churches, and people are still saying, no, he did not.
Right.
No, he did not.
I don't understand it. Oh my goodness.
We had a woman bishop back in the first century, and
Lord,
people are still saying, no, that couldn't be. That couldn't be.
I know. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Okay, so then let's do a lighter one. We have a couple who are doing the study, and they have now been watching a bunch of movies about angels. And so with angels in them. And so they wanted to know if you have had a favorite movie that has angels in it.
For sure, Clarence.
Oh, yeah.
Clarence in It's a Wonderful Life is my favorite angel because, he's as Jimmy Stewart says, when he's in the hut warming from having fallen from Clarence saving him from drowning, and he says, well, I'm your guardian angel. He goes, well, that fits. That's about the kind of angel you're the kind of angel I would get. I love Clarence. He's my favorite. And of course, there's the movie, The Bishop's Wife, which was remade into The Preacher's Wife.
Mhm.
And I like both of those. Those are my two favorites.
That's great.
What about you guys?
I'm a big Clarence fan as well. My kids roll their eyes every Christmas when I say it's time to watch It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
But someday when I'm long gone, they'll be doing it to their kids as well. I think that's the influence it's having. So.
They will. You're right. They will. And there's no angels in Charlie Brown, but I love Charlie Brown. After kind of rereading the book and reteaching it this week with friends, my husband and I pulled up Charlie Brown and watched it on Netflix or someplace 2 nights ago. It's like 30 minutes. It's perfect.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. Excellent. Charlie, your question?
Oh, yeah. It's my turn now. That's great.
It's your turn.
So here's my
finished my
question. Carrie asked me to come up with a question today, and I think this is as much an author question as much as it is specific to this. But like, what's your hope whenever you sit down to write a book? Abingdon gets in touch and says, "Okay, can you write about something for Advent?" Like, what's your hope when this is going out to churches like ours, and people like the people of our church are going to read this, study this, think this through? Like, what's your hope for them as individuals? What's your hope for the church, through the writing of your studies? What do you really hope for in that?
Well, in this one, I think, in all of them, it's, that people can actually experience the presence of God in all of them. That's my hope. But in specifically for this one, there's several things that flashed through my mind when you're asking that question. One is that what I loved about the connection between the Old Testament, the stories in the Old Testament relating to these nativity stories and the angels in them, is that just as it was meant in the first century for people to see these stories and say, the God of Abraham and the God of Hannah and the God of Daniel and the same God who was working and was faithful in their life to deliver good news and great things for them. That same God, of course, was faithful and working in the first century. And that same God is active and working and has messages for you and wants you to be open to hear them, wants you to believe them, and most importantly, wants you to know that you are loved above anything else, and that God came in the flesh for you to show you that love, and then you are to pass that along to others. That we are to be, and especially in I go back to Joseph's story of all the darkness that Herod was bringing into the world, and I wrote the story of Alfred Delp in Joseph's story, but tying that into Herod and how Alfred Delp had said, these are dark days, and you need to be the angel, you telling his congregation, that smuggling these words out to his congregation, you need to be the one to bring hope and encouragement to those in the world. This is a dark time, and these messages are so needed, and we're going to overcome this. The dark, he didn't say this is the way I'm interpreting it, that the darkness is not going to overcome the light. The light's going to overcome the darkness. And when all the Herods of the world are dead, God is still speaking. God is still there, encouraging and giving hope. And we are the ones that are responsible for keeping that hope alive and keeping that light lit in the darkness.
Yeah. And we've been working through this year, the Bible year, that McGray de Vega worked through in 2020 with his congregation. We've been doing that this year, and that's a similar thread, is this sort of faithful always acting God in the world, and it's the same God, Old and New Testament, and yeah, how that spills out into our lives, and how we carry that message and that light, is always the call. That's amazing. Thank you for that answer.
Thank you. It's definitely in line with what we've been discussing, and we just deeply appreciate you joining us for this video extra for our classes. We just really, really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't have been there. One of the others, it is that season. It's that time when it's like every night there's something, it seems like. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to come back and be with you.
Our pleasure. And thank you for joining us, Susan. And thank you for your writing. We're really enjoying the book. Thank you.
And Advent and Christmas blessings on all of you.
Same to you.